It's an old joke now at this stage that if you wait long enough, George Lucas will change something else about Star Wars, which admittedly doesn't work as well now that it's owned by Disney. However, that doesn't mean that everything he did change to it was bad. I'm Sean Ferrick for What Culture Star Wars, and here are 10 brilliant changes that George Lucas made to his saga. Number 10. Expanding Cloud City. Let's kick off with a rather simple change that helps improve the tone of one of the original trilogy's standout locations. The 1997 Special Edition turned the previously white-walled and enclosed Cloud City into a wide-windowed and sprawling sky metropolis that finally didn't look like the Tantive 4 from the opening of A New Hope. In 1980, green screen in its current form was a far-off dream. Matte paintings could be used to create vast fantasy environments, but there were many issues in compositing them that created strict limitations when actors or even movement was involved. Now, with changes in day and the constant presence of clouds in the background, not only does it feel like Lando owns a city and not just a corridor, but it helps reaffirm the juxtaposition of these dark events happening at what is essentially a man-made heaven. Many of the attempts to broaden the world for the special editions, including the thriving, distinctly unscum and villainous Mos Eisley, failed miserably, but here's one case where it was a resounding success. Number 9. Aurebesh. The Star Wars universe is a vast place. With over 30 years of almost endless tie-in material, it's become one of the most developed fictional worlds, trumping Narnia, Middle-earth and Oz with ease. And, as any fantasy universe will have when it gains a strong enough following, it's developed its own language. Not quite as in-depth as Klingon, for which an edition of the Bible exists, or Elvish, which Tolkien had much more love for than the stories he created. Aurebesh is still a mainstay of the world. Its written form was Basic, the in-world name for English. Its alphabet similar, but not quite, to our own that appears all over the games, TV shows, and yes, films. Originally just made up of symbols intended to look spacey, it developed meaning, allowing audiences to see what exactly R2 is saying to his pilots when in space. The language didn't exist until after the first film, and thus our traditional English characters were used. When it came to the DVD, Lucas decided to rectify that and digitally change the words, most notably with power on the tractor beam controls, to their Aurebesh equivalents. A small but effective change. Number 8. Ending celebrations. The original ending for Return of the Jedi is, for lack of a better phrase, an Ewok Glastonbury, headlined by the Blue Ghost Group. It does work, although only if viewing Episode 6 in isolation. As the end of the original trilogy, it feels a little downplayed, silly against the elation or desperation of the previous two. And, as the end of the whole saga, it's just laughable. Why are we ending with some fluffy aliens we only met a short time ago? Lucas addressed this in 1997 by getting rid of Yub Nub in favour of a catchier tune, and adding in shots of Coruscant, Bespin and Tatooine celebrating the Emperor's fall, which is admittedly odd. The Empire doesn't exist on the latter, and surely the former would still be under the control of the Remnant. The DVD then added in Naboo, meaning that 3 major planets from the prequels now got a chance to celebrate. It's controversial to cut Yub Nub, but essentially make the ending work. Number 7. Removing Luke's scream. With 3 different special editions of the films, Lucas has had ample time to go back on the changes he's made. Although Greedo still shoots at Han, albeit at the same time now, we've seen some of the more erroneous mistakes corrected. Jabba in A New Hope remains superfluous, but he now looks less cartoony, and a trilogy-wide colouring issue on the 2004 DVD was corrected on the Blu-ray. The biggest correction, however, comes in The Empire Strikes Back, the least tampered-with movie of the originals. For some reasons that no one seems to be able to grasp, the 1997 Special Edition adds in a scream when Luke throws himself down the air chute thing in Cloud City. Apart from being narratively flawed, why would Luke scream when he's made the decision to throw himself off? The lazy origin of the scream makes it ridiculously dumb. It's the Emperor's death cry from Return of the Jedi. Realising his stupidity, Lucas removed the soundbite for the DVD. Number 6. Cutting down Vader's no. Yes, despite many people not realising, Lucas did tinker with the prequels when they came out on DVD. The biggest changes were made to the Phantom Menace, the pod race was extended, and that pointless air taxi scene was integrated, but the best decision made upon their immediate release, there's another change that was made later for the Blu-ray still to come, was fixing a major fan complaint. It clearly wasn't planned, but when Darth Vader hears of Padme's death, audiences the world over laughed away at his comic no It was just so far away from everything we'd seen of the masked character in the previous films, and tonally left us far away from the original Star Wars. Clearly, Lucas heeded the massive backlash, because the line in the DVD version is considerably shorter. Now, it's just about possible to make it through Episode 3 without bursting out laughing at the dialogue. It's only shortened slightly, but the change had a big impact. Number 5. James Earl Jones gets his dues. Everyone knows James Earl Jones was the voice of Darth Vader, but criminally, you could say, he wasn't credited for the first 2 films of the original trilogy. Well, criminally until you realise the reason why. Jones didn't think he deserved it. Following on from a previous controversy relating to Mercedes McCambridge as the voice of the devil coming from Reagan in The Exorcist, Jones believed he was a mere special effect, adding to but not defining the character. However, when the films turned toward Vader's story and Jones saw the effect of his voice, he decided to allow himself to be credited for Return of the Jedi. And, when it came around to the special editions, he was finally given a credit as the voice in A New Hope and Empire. A small change, but a much deserved and important one. Number 4. CGI Yoda in Episode 1. Another prequel entry here, this time one that has a movie-wide effect. When The Phantom Menace first hit cinemas, the Yoda puppet looked worse than the one featured 20 years earlier in the original trilogy. Obviously, Lucas and co wanted to honour the green alien's origins, but for a film that otherwise still looks visually resplendent in both CGI and practical effects, the puppet stood out. Of course, in amongst the rest of the complaints about Episode 1, the poor Yoda was low on people's priorities, and ended up an oddity when the character became a much more nimble CGI creation for the last 2 entries in the saga. Things eventually changed. When prepping for Revenge of the Sith, a movie that features more Yoda action than ever, the VFX team went back to Episode 1 and redid the puppet with the CGI model as practice for the more complicated sequences to come. And when the Blu-ray came around, it was decided to put the computerized effort into the film. And what an improvement! Now, we have a consistent Yoda throughout the prequels, and one that leads to his original appearance quite well. Number 3. The proper Emperor in Empire. It was one of the bigger continuity errors in the original trilogy. When audiences first got to see the Emperor, the one man above Vader in Episode 5, it was Elaine Baker, wife of makeup designer Rick, with superimposed chimp eyes and the voice of Clive Revill. Unnerving and enticing in equal measure, the change in design for Return of the Jedi and eventual casting of Ian McDiarmid, this time without aging makeup, for the prequels ended up making this scene feel a little out of place. To combat this, Lucas took advantage of having an in-makeup McDiarmid for Revenge of the Sith and reshot the scene with some tweaked dialogue for the 2004 DVD release. Overall, it improves both the movie, the original trilogy, and how it links to the prequels. The trifecta, all the changes tried to do, but few did. The only real issue here is that the conversation still feels restrained. Palpatine looks normal, but there's still too much airing around Vader's identity for the scene to be realistic. I'm not saying that the Emperor should call Luke his son, but there could have been a less hokey dialogue option. Number 2, no more compositing issues. In the original release of Star Wars, as it was then known on its own, there was an issue with the effects. Think of the land speeder. There's ghost lines, a splodge shadow, and not to mention, the speeder itself looks like it was just added into the frames from a sticker book. For all of its groundbreaking nature, most of the original Star Wars, and to a lesser extent the later 2, effects dated badly. And not in the same way as the rudimentary CGI of the special editions, but in a this is changing cinema, but most of this has never been done before, so isn't very refined kind of way. Sadly, as the car scenes in Pulp Fiction show, dated effects can, if not properly dealt with, pull you too far out of a movie. The decision to correct many of these errors, despite probably being the genesis of the special editions, makes many of Star Wars money shots not only watchable, but still mind-blowing. There's a fine line between adjusting matte effects and adding in new scenes with CGI creatures, but if there was a release of the films that had this, and maybe the number 1 on this list, as the only change, I'd still be happy. Number 1, A New Hope. The first change that Lucas ever made to his films after release is one of the most important. When Star Wars first hit cinemas in 1977, it was called just that. There was no episode number, no subtitle, just the series name. But George was very quick to change that. The name of the film had gone through various stages through production. The Journal of the Wills evolved into The Star Wars, which ended up being the model for a 6, 9, 12-part series, with Lucas spiritually making the 4th part. Smartly, he kept that number away from the title, as many people would understandably be confused that there was no previous 3 films. Once the film was a hit, however, Lucas gained the freedom to go back to his original idea, naming Star Wars 2 the episode 5 we all know, and more importantly, re-releasing the original film as a more syllabled Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope in 1981. This change proved instrumental in crafting audience perceptions not only of the trilogy, but the wider concept of Star Wars as a multi-episode story. But more importantly, it showed incredibly early on that to Lucas, his films were an ongoing project he was happy to continue tinkering with. And there you go. The special editions weren't all that bad, still not amazing, but are there any more changes that you approve of, or do you still think the films should have remained untampered? Drop it into the comments below. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Remember, you can catch us over on Twitter at WhatCultureStarWars. You can catch myself at Sean Ferrick as well. Look after yourselves until the next time I see you, and may the Force be with you.